Hey folks, today the real fun begins because we're going to show you how to frame an irregular pitch hip roof. Some people call those bastard roofs, and after a little while you'll start to understand why. An irregular hip is a hip that has two different pitches on each side of the hip, and they are a lot more difficult to frame. Now, if you're brand new to roof framing, you're better off to watch our previous video on regular hip roofs. It's good to master those principles first before you attempt these irregular hips. Okay, architects are using these more and more, and there's some good reasons to do so. It's an indispensable tool for an architect to be able to balance roof lines and proportions, but it sure makes life difficult for the framer. You see, when you mix pitches on a hip roof, it messes everything up. The fascias and soffits don't align, the jack rafters are cut on funky angles, the wall plates are different heights, the hip rafters are skewed out of whack and don't even run across the corner of the wall. In short, it's just a mess. Well, we can curse those architects all we like, but bastard roofs are not going to go anywhere. We just got to learn to do them more efficiently. Now, thankfully, we've got a handy tool to handle it. It's called Roof Framer's Bible. I wrote this book 30 years ago, and it's full of drawings and examples that go through every aspect of these irregular pitch roofs. Now, in those examples, the dimensions are for a much larger structure than this model that's behind us. So we're going to use the dimensions from the examples in the book and just use this model for visual illustration of the principles we're communicating. So we're going to just take all these things about irregular hips, we're going to walk through them step by step and explain them clearly so that you can master these irregular hips. Let's run through the consequences of mixing pitches on an irregular hip. Now here on the lower pitch side, this is an 812 and it's sitting on this plate. And an 812 is going to drop a certain amount to the fascia point at the end of the tail. Now if we can continue this level all the way around here, around the corner of the building, maintaining the same level to the fascia point, this steeper pitch 1212 rafter, because it's rising so much more steeply, is going to require a raised plate to make it work. And you can see we've got two additional plates on this side. And obviously that makes it a lot more difficult when your rafters are sitting on two different plate lines. Now we can accommodate it in other ways. We can change the width of our overhangs, and we'll show you that in a little bit. But as you can see, it makes it a lot more complicated. Additionally, the hip rafters on a regular hip will always run on a 45-degree angle. So the center of the hip is always the intersection of this plane of the roof and this plane of the roof. And if we've got the same pitch on both sides, that intersection line will always be a 45-degree angle. But since this side of the roof has been pulled steeper, essentially extending the end of the ridge, it throws the hip rafter from a 45-degree angle skewed over to this oddball angle, in this case a 56-degree angle. So the jack rafters here on the 812 side will be cut with a 56-degree miter, whereas the 1212 jacks will be cut with a 34-degree miter. Now it also changes the pitch of the hip rafter, so this is now a non-standard pitch. Also, because the hip is no longer a 45, it will not run across the corner of the wall, but will be offset to the steep pitch side of the roof. The cheek cuts on this end and at the ridge will also be completely non-standard. The hip backing angles on top of this hip will all be non-standard. The roof sheathing cuts, so we're going to put sheet goods on this roof for roof decking. The angle that would be cut on the end of that sheet is going to be different. When you've got a regular hip, that angle for this side of the roof and this side of the roof are exactly the same. But with an irregular hip, this sheathing cuts are different from the sheathing cuts on this side of the roof. So you can see there's a lot of consequences of mixing pitches, and we're going to go through all the ramifications of that and how you handle it and explain those in great detail so that you can get a handle on these irregular pitch hips.
All right, the first consequence of mixing pitches on a hip roof is that the ridge gets longer. Now, here in this drawing, it's showing a regular 812 hip roof, and you can see if you put a 1212 pitch on either end, indicated by this dotted line, the ridge gets much longer. And of course, frankly, that's the main reason architects will mix pitches on a hip roof. Because if you recall, a regular hip, the length of the ridge is always the length of the house minus the depth of the house plus the thickness of the ridge. So in this case, that ridge is only 6 foot 1.5 inches long. And that does the job. This roof will shed water, but it doesn't look very nice You know, who wants a cone head house? This is just not a good, well-balanced front elevation. So the architects want this ridge longer for appearances. And when we pull this ridge out from this position, we drag it out to this point to put a 12-12 on it. Same thing over here. We pull the end of the ridge out to here and put a 12-12 pitch on it. We get a much longer ridge. And it balances the front elevation. This is a much nicer looking house. However, it messes with a lot of things. So on the next drawing, we'll show you a plan view drawing that's looking straight down on it from above. And we can take a look at what that does to these hip lines when you lengthen the ridge. This is a plan view of what we were just looking at. So it's showing the difference between a regular pitch hip, like ours was 8-12 on all four sides. As you go all the way around this roof, everything is 8-12. And the bastard or dual pitch hip. We're going to illustrate with this drawing. Now, whenever you have a regular hip, these hips always run on a 45-degree angle. You'll see that right here. And this indicates our overhang here and here. And since they're equal, that hip will run dead across the corner of the wall line. Very important to note that. Okay, now that we're going to make the ends of this structure a 12-12, we're going to pull this ridge point from here out to here. That changes the angle of our hip. Now back here on this end, the intersection point remains the same. We want this gutter to wrap straight around on the fascia, so this point doesn't change. But by pulling it out to this point, we've changed this hip angle from a 45-degree angle to a 34-degree angle. And that affects quite a few different things. See, these jack rafters that will be on this 12-12 steep side here, when they run up here and hit this hip, they'll be cut on this 34-degree angle. The jack rafters on this side, when they're 8-12 pitch, and when they run up here and hit this new hip line, they're now going to be cut on a 56-degree angle. You say, well, where did you get the 56 degrees? Well, it's the complement of 34 degrees. In other words, 90 degrees minus the 34 degrees will give us 56 degrees. And that is what the 8-12 jacks here, where they run up and hit the hip, they'll be cut on a 56-degree miter. So that's a pretty big deal. It affects a lot of different things. Also notice that before the hip rafter on a 45 ran across the corner of the wall, now it no longer crosses the corner of the wall. The center of this hip, where it comes down here, is offset from the corner. And that's an important element of bastard hips. So bear that in mind as we continue on to look at the various effects of going to a dual pitch or bastard hip roof. This is a perspective view that I trust that will make this really clear. Take a look at this green line down here. It comes across here and over here. And this is the base of the pyramid that we were referencing. This is the fascia point at the end of the overhangs. Now, because of all the differences that are caused by these irregular hips with the mixed pitches, it can create a lot of confusion. We're going to have different overhangs at times. We're going to have built-up plates, as is shown here. The hips will offset off the corner. A lot of stuff going on there. So to keep it straight in our heads, the easiest way is to work from this fascia point, or base of the pyramid line, here at the end of the rafter tails. So if we figure all of our rafter lengths and our framing points from this common denominator baseline, we're going to be a lot better off and a lot less confused. So for our run, we're up here at the ridge. Our 8-12 run goes over here to our fascia line. And our 12-12 run from the end of the ridge over here to the end of our overhang here. And so if we figure it that way, it's quick and easy to get all of the framing points on this roof system. And we'll show you that in the next drawings.
On this model, we've got an 8-12 regular hip on this end and an irregular 8-12, 12-12 bastard hip on the other. So when we need to find the end of this ridge, it's a very easy matter with a regular hip. The hip rafter runs on a 45-degree angle, and we know that the king common here has exactly the same run as this common over here. And since this common's run is 1/2 the width of the structure, it's a very easy thing to know how far to pull from the corner of the wall back to this common, and therefore the end of the ridge. But what about the other end of the ridge? Where is it? It's a much more challenging thing with an irregular hip to know that. it takes several calculations to find that out. What is the run of that 1212 king common on the end? Well, with Roof Framers Bible, it's really easy. You see, it's got a fantastic factor chart that with the multiplication of one number will give us that king common run that we need to locate the end of the ridge. So if we have the run of our 812, we can multiply by one number and it will give us the run of the 1212. And Roof Framers Bible does that for all the different pitch combinations within the book. So with the multiplication of a single number, we can get any of our run numbers. We can get our rafter lengths, our hip lengths, everything we need straight from that factor chart. So super easy and quick to get accurate numbers for all the framing points within our structure.
Okay, here we are on page 138 of Roof Framers Bible, and this is for the 812, 1212 pitch combination. And these pages give all the information we need, all pre-calculated. Things like the pitch of the hip rafter, the hip offsets, the jack rafter deductions, the sheathing cuts, loads and loads of information. But for starters, we want to take a look at this factor chart because it's especially useful to us in finding the framing points of our roof system on an irregular pitch hip roof. Okay, let's take a look at this factor chart. And we can see by multiplying one number, we can take any value that we have and convert it to the value that we need. Of course, in our example, we were saying we need to find out where the end of the ridge was. In other words, the run of the 1212 king common. So we have the 812 rafter run, and we would simply multiply it by this 0.667, and it would give us that 1212 rafter run. But we can also use any of these other factors to get what we need. For instance, if we have the 812 rafter run, we can multiply it times 1.202, and it gives us the 812 rafter length. We can get the rise. We can get the hip valley rafter length. Any of these that we need. And conversely to what we were doing before, if we have the 1212 rafter run and we need to convert it to the 812 rafter run for that roof section, we just simply multiply it by this 1.5, and that would give us what we need as well. So all kinds of things that we can get from this factor chart. Now you can use a Construction Master calculator if you like, and you can punch a bunch of different keys and you can try to remember which ones to punch. And if you're like me with big fat fingers, you can wonder if you accidentally hit the wrong key. Or you can simply multiply one number out of this factor chart and get any value that you need. Quick and easy. Okay, here's a drawing that I think will pull it all together and make it very easy to understand. This is on page 31 of Roof Framers Bible, and it's depicting an 812, 1212 irregular hip. Now on the drawing here, these light colors are indicating the 812 slopes, and the darker colors, with the hatching, the 1212 slopes. Now we're going to use this drawing to show how you can get every bit of information you need to frame this roof by using the factor chart on page 138 of Roof Framers Bible. So by multiplying a single number from the factor chart, we can get any bit of information we need. Every ridge length, every rafter run, every hip length, every valley length, anything and everything you need to frame this roof. All right, for the sake of explanation here today, we're not going to make any allowances for the thicknesses of our ridges or hips, and that is to eliminate the fractions that would tend to confuse the discussion. Also, we're going to make all of our calculations from the end of the rafter tail. So right here on the back corner, we're going to go from the outside of the overhang here down to the outside of the overhang here at the front. Okay, let's get started, and as always, you want to start with your main ridge. So our 812 is running front to back here, and so we go to our span over here is 36 feet. Half of that 36 feet would be 18 feet. So the 812 run would be 18 feet. And we can use our either our rafter length chart or the factor chart on page 138 of Roof Framers Bible, and we go in there and we can get our rafter length of 259 5/8. Now next we need to know where the end of this ridge is. What is the run of the 1212 king common from here to here? Well, it's very quick and easy to do. We simply take the 18-foot run of the 812 rafter and go into our factor chart, and it will give us this king common run, and it's 144 inches or 12 feet. So very easy to do. We can then use that run number to get this 1212 rafter length of 203 5/8. All right, what about this hip? Same thing, and we've got a choice. We can use either the 144 inches of run here, or the 18 foot of run here, which is the same for this hip here. And we can use the factor chart or the rafter length chart to get our hip length of 296 7/8. Okay, moving on to this projection on the rear of the home, we want to start with the ridge. And so our span back here is 18 feet. And so the run for half of that is 9 feet. Now, we don't have any 12-12 commons here. They're all jack rafters. But if we did have one, it would be a 9-foot run. So how do we know where this ridge point is? Well, we can quickly get the run of that 812 rafter by going into our factor chart, and it would give us that as 13 foot 6 inches. And then we can use that run number to get our 812 rafter length, which you see is 194 3/4. Now for this hip over here, same thing. We can use either run number, either the 12-12 side, which is 9 feet, or the 812 side, which is 13 foot 6 inches. And our factor chart will give us the hip length here of 222 5/8. Okay, we jump up here to this little broken hip here, number 6. And we need to know what this run number is right here. We can see it's 4 feet. Well, how did we get it? Well, the front gable here has a span of 16 feet. Half of that is going to be 8 feet. This 12-12 king common here is a 12-foot run. We know that because we already figured it out for this end. It was 144 inches or 12 feet. So 12 feet minus the 8 feet gives us the 4-foot run number here for this little hip rafter. So we simply go into our factor chart again, and it will give us our hip length of 98 7/8. And then finally here for this little hip on the back, we know from our architectural plans of this offset of the wall that this run number for the 812 is 9 feet. So we use that run number, go into our factor chart, and it will give us a 6-foot run number here to the bottom end of this hip rafter. Now again, we know this is a 12-foot run, so 12 foot minus 6, and gives us a 6-foot run from here to here for this hip. And we use our factor chart to get our hip length of 148.5 inches. So you see that by using the factor chart and multiplying a single number, we can get everything that we need. And Roof Framers Bible has these factor charts for 68 different pitch combinations in Roof Framers Bible. So super quick, super accurate. We can handle any complex bastard roof by using these charts. Okay, the second consequence of mixing pitches on a hip roof is illustrated in this drawing. We've got an 812 rafter here indicated by the solid lines, and it's sitting on a wall plate. And then we have a 1212 rafter indicated by the dotted lines. And if we set it on the same wall plate, then this 1212 rafter obviously is going to be dropping a lot more quickly. So the fascia point at the end of the tail is going to drop 4 inches lower than the fascia point on the 812 rafter. Now obviously that creates a lot of issues, and we're going to have to show you what has to be done to accommodate that.
Okay, we want to illustrate the fact that two rafters sitting on the same plate of different pitches will drop the fascia to a different height. So this is an 812, and if we were to put a 1212 on the same plate, you can see that it's dropping faster. So it's sitting on the same plate. You're going to have a different height out here on the end of the tail. So in order to account for that, we need to raise this rafter up to a higher plate to make it work. We're going to illustrate how we use built-up plates to flush fascia heights. Now, the 812 rafter is here, and it's sitting on this plate down here. We've gone ahead and added the 2 plates that we determined we needed for the 1212. So if we place the 1212 rafter on that, you can see that because it's beginning at a higher plate, but dropping much faster, it will plane out at the exact same height. So these fascia points will align. Our fascia can break straight down the 812 side and then break around the corner on the 1212 rafter tails and be perfectly level.
All right, we have this illustration on page 27 of Roof Framers Bible, and it's illustrating 2 options for leveling the cornice on an irregular pitch hip roof. We've got option 1 of having a shorter overhang, or option 2, raising the steep side rafter to a higher plate line. So let's take a closer look. Over here we've got the 812 rafter, and we know it's going from the hap down to the end of the tail. It's going to drop 8 inches. and that will establish what we'll call the fascia line, this dotted line that runs along here. So we need all of the fascia to be the same height as this fascia line. So to do that, we got option 1, and we've got, note that the 812 and the 1212 are still sitting on the same plate line height. And here we are, the 1212, but since it's a steeper rafter, it's going to drop quicker, and so it will attain the height of this fascia line in only an 8-inch overhang. So we can do that. That's nice and simple. We're sitting on the same plate. We just make a shorter overhang, and we've solved our problem. But some people don't like that. They want the overhangs consistent. So to do that, we'll jump over here to option 2, and that is we must raise this 1212 rafter up 4 inches in order to make them align here at the fascia height. It's dropping more quickly. So to get that full 12-inch overhang, we simply have to have that rafter begin from a higher point. So the difference, of course, between the 1212 and the 812 drop is going to be 4 inches. So we have to raise this rafter up 4 inches. So how do we do that? Well, we could build the wall taller by 4 inches, or we could add additional plates. This drawing is showing adding 2 additional plates. And since they're 1.5 inches thick, 2 plates will give us 3 inches. Well, you say, what about the other inch? And true, we have to make allowance for that as well. So we could do that by, let's say, ripping 2 layers of 1/2-inch plywood and putting them on top of these plates. But, that's a little fiddly and unnecessary. We can accomplish the same thing by simply altering the level cut of our bird's mouth. We could move it down 1 inch. So if you look over here at this rafter, the hap, or from the top of the rafter down to the plate, let's say it was 6 inches. Over here, we could simply go from the top of the rafter and go down 7 inches to make our level cut. So we're just altering the horizontal cut of the bird's mouth by that additional 1 inch. And that's the easiest and quickest way to make that allowance, and that gives us the full 4-inch to make up for the difference in the drop of the tail. So now we've got a 12-inch overhang on the 1212 rafter, we've got a 12-inch overhang on the 812 rafter, and the fascia points line up perfectly right along the fascia line, and our cornice will align around the corners of the building. So that's how it's done. Okay, this drawing is illustrating option 1 that we showed you in the earlier drawing. And it's got an 812 on this side with a 12-inch overhang. It's got a 1212 on this side with an 8-inch overhang. Now you would note that they're both sitting on the same wall plate. And the way that you level this fascia point is by having the short overhang on this side. Now you want to notice that the hip does not run on a 45-degree angle, but because you've got a short overhang on this side, it does run right across the corner of the wall. And frankly, that's the main advantage of doing one with unequal overhangs, is that it keeps you setting the rafters both on the same wall plate and the hips run across the corner of the wall. But some people don't want these irregular overhangs, and so we'll show you how to accommodate that in the next drawing. Here on page 29 of Roof Framer's Bible, we have a plan view drawing that illustrates option 2 for aligning fascia heights. That is where we want to have a consistent overhang on each side. So on the drawing here, you'll see that here on the 812 side, we've got a 12-inch overhang. And then over here on the 1212 side of the hip, we also have a 12-inch overhang. Now, as you recall, for option 2, that requires that the steep side, this 1212 side, plate be a higher plate line. We've got to jack that plate up 4 inches. So either building up additional plates or altering your bird's mouth, you got to have these coming off a higher plate. All right, also note that the hip rafter, the center of the hip rafter coming down here, is going to cross the wall, not at the corner of the wall. So we're going to have a hip offset from the corner of the wall to the center of the hip of 6 inches. Because these hips are no longer on a 45-degree angle, as you would for a regular hip, these hips are not going to sit on the corner of the wall. They're going to cross back off of the corner, in this case 6 inches. Now the nice thing about Roof Framer's Bible is that it gives you the hip and valley offsets for all these different roof pitch combinations. So it's a very simple thing to locate that hip offset point. You just hook the corner of the wall and pull back, in this case 6 inches, and that will be the center of the hip crosses this wall line right here, right there. So that makes it nice and easy. This is option 2 for aligning cornice heights using consistent overhangs on each side.
Okay, it's been standard practice for framers when they're figuring their rafter lengths to go from the hap here or the wall plate. But when you've got irregular pitches, it really creates a lot of confusion. See, sometimes you have different overhangs, and often you'll have different plate heights like we have on our model here. So if you're trying to go from the plates or the overhangs, you can get confused. But like a pyramid, this fascia point at the end of the tail is the common denominator. It's going to wrap around the building at the same level, and each slope will come up from that common baseline at the end of the tail. So just like having a hat, you can visualize a hat with the rim of the hat. That fascia line is the brim of our hat. And we can move it up and down on raised plates or whatever we're going to do, but the rim of the hat stays consistent. It's the same thing here. This fascia point's wrapping around the building, and we can adjust our bird's mouth, we can add plates, we can have different overhangs, but if we're figuring everything from that common fascia point that wraps the building, it's going to make it a lot easier. All right, on this end of our model, we've got an 812 rafter on this side and a 1212 rafter over here. Now, you'll see we've got 2 extra plates, and as you may remember, those are required to jack this 1212 rafter up higher so that the fascia point at the end of the overhang will wrap around here level with the fascia point of the 812 rafter over here. Now, I've left the OSB down so you can see these plates, and I've offset this top plate out a ½ inch so that it's flush with the outside of our wall. Now, we've got a 12-inch overhang on the 1212 side and a 12-inch overhang on the 812 side. And anytime we have an irregular pitch hip with equal overhangs, we always know that the hip rafter will not run across the corner of the wall, but will be offset toward the steeper pitch side. So our hip rafter is going to begin out here at the intersection of our overhangs, and it's going to run at a skewed angle, not a 45, in this case, a 56-degree angle, right up to the corner of our ridge. And the center of that hip rafter will cross the wall here at the high plate. So how much is that? If we look in Roof Framer's Bible for a 812, 1212 combination and a 12-inch overhang, we'll see that our hip offset is 6 inches. So from the outside of the wall to where the center of the hip crosses this plate will be 6 inches. And you'll see how that works when we set our hip rafter up here. All right, we're going to jam this thing up right to the corner of the ridge there. And you'll see that the backing angles here on the hip plane out right at the ridge. The backing angle on this side planes out beautifully with our 812 rafter on this side. And the angle here planes out with the 1212 rafter on this side. And we see that our bird's mouth point here hits dead on our mark for our 6-inch offset. And the double cheek cut here at the end of the hip tail aligns perfectly with our overhangs on each side. You know, it's amazing when you get these accurate angles and dimensions out of Roof Framer's Bible, just how perfectly these things will fit. And we're going to show you that in just a second, and also give you all the steps we took to lay out and cut this hip rafter. All right, that concludes part 1 of this video. We're going to give you a little intermission now. And we trust that the information presented so far has been clearly explained, but if I've failed to do that on any point, please hit us a note in the comment section so we can improve on it. Now, to get part 2 of this video, you'll have to hit that subscribe button. Not really, I'm kidding of course, but to not miss out on a future video, we'd appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing. Coming up in part 2, we're going to give step-by-step instructions on how to cut the hip rafter, and then we're going to show you how to figure and cut the irregular jack rafters. And lastly, the quick and easy way to do roof sheathing cuts. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you soon.